second Entrepreneurial Inside Sessions. We have a guest that many of you will be familiar with. We have Lisa da Rocha joining us today to talk about work-life harmony and to maybe have a little bit of a debate on that. We're really, really excited to kind of bring this series to the Ella community because we think it's really, really important to talk to experts in their fields and to give practical tips to entrepreneurs about life, growing businesses, and everything in between kind of thing. So I'd like to introduce Lisa. Again, I know many of you know her, but her background is as a leadership coach. She works with senior leaders wanting to bring more meaning, impact, and connection to their work and lives. Over the last 2 decades, she has co-founded a company that grew into a multi-million-dollar business. And she's also been an executive with Brookfield, heading up several different business lines during her tenure. She left her corporate career in 2016, and she now works at the intersection of neuroscience, leadership, and coaching, using principles from each of those to help leaders and teams reconnect with their passion and purpose. She is married to her high school sweetheart. She has 3 children aged 12, 9, and 5, and she recently decided to learn to play the saxophone. So I think Lisa will have some very interesting insights for us, again, on the work-life harmony issue. Before we launch into the fireside chat, I just want to get a sense of who's in the audience today. So I'm just going to launch a poll. We'll ask you some questions, and then that way we'll be able to better tailor our answers. I've launched the poll, so if you could please let us know how you feel about work-life harmony, what kind of roles you might be playing, and then also how you feel you're handling work-life harmony in light of COVID. So do you see the poll? Does everybody see the poll? Yeah, okay.
Nicole, for the
Yeah.
second question, you can only give one answer, but the question asks if you have more than one hat.
Okay. Well, we all know that everybody on this call plays more than one role, so apologize about programming that. So feel free to maybe give the most important in your eyes. Okay. About half of you have voted, so if you can just take the next 30 seconds to vote. Interesting results coming in. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to end the polling now. So it's interesting if you look at the results of the poll in terms of feeling overwhelmed. Some people feel somewhat overwhelmed, but they do have a balance between work-life harmony and whatnot. Many of you see your primary role on a day-to-day basis as business owners, but as I mentioned, I know that many of you wear multiple hats and even some hats that aren't even included in the list. And then in terms of the effect on COVID, 40% of you have found some new solutions, which is great to hear, and 40% of you find that it's much harder, and all of that is completely understandable. So thank you for sharing that, and I think we're going to kind of dive right into it. Lisa, why don't we begin with you telling us a little bit about your journey?
You've covered so many points in my bio. I started as an entrepreneur, growing a coffee distribution company, and then was recruited into the corporate world where I spent about 17 years. And at the beginning of that journey, I was really focused on figuring out how to be a good leader. Like, what is it that makes it a good, effective, inspiring leader? And how do you cultivate a culture that has people look forward to going to work? How do you look at work from a place that is not just one slice of your pie, but the part of the pie, and you've got a sense that this is a multidimensional human who has lots of different parts to them. And I loved that. And I loved my time with Brookfield. And then there came a moment that a lot of that changed. I lost that fire. I lost that meaning. And that was the point where I started to realize that even though I had this real big interest and focus on leadership, I was also doing a lot of managing risk. And this is totally normal. We all do this, right? We're socialized to manage risk in our lives, to minimize them as much as possible, to look for advancement, right? Because that ultimately reduces risk, and to look for acceptance or approval. And once I felt like I'm not going to say I could check off the box, but I kind of got there, and I was like, well, but now what? Right? Like, now what do I do? And I feel like there comes a moment, and multiple moments throughout our careers, and where we need to reassess whether we're still being driven by purpose, by meaning, by contribution, by service. So many of us as entrepreneurs go into our business from that place. And I'll speak for myself as a corporate leader, as well as my husband, who has been an entrepreneur for 25 plus years. You lose it along the way. Mm-hmm. And it's in those intersections where you lose it, where I think it's so critically important for our own well-being, for our own satisfaction, joy, and those around us, that we go back and say, like, how do I get that again? Mm-hmm. And that led me to building my leadership company and becoming an executive coach. It was me leaving the corporate world with having no idea what I was going to do. Like, I left without a parachute. I was kind of like, and finding my way to something that I feel really connected to and just passionate about. And I laugh because as I'm saying this, I think of my parents who are now in their 80s, immigrants to Canada, and said, why are you, at my 40s, why are you back at school? Like, why did you completely change what you did? And the reason is because I was in search of meaning again. I was in search of looking forward to waking up and feeling that fire in my belly, and feeling like I was contributing.
It's interesting because in listening to your story, I think about a lot of the stories of the other women on this call, and there are a lot of parallels, I think, coming out of a corporate career, starting their own business and looking for something more and almost altruistic or intrinsic in that process. So again, I think there's a lot of women that can relate to your journey and all of the things that you've had to evaluate along the way, but also you've had to reinvent yourself as a person as well along the way. So I'm sure that's been really, really interesting part of the journey, but it's also interesting to have the ability and the opportunity to kind of learn and continue learning about yourself and about other people and leadership and all the other areas that you kind of specialize in. So
it's interesting, Nicole, because from today, looking back, I think, oh, of course, this is what I'm doing, right? I can look at how everything I've done up until this point has gotten me to today, but I didn't see that when I left corporate. I couldn't connect those dots. But yeah, it has required some reinvention and a lot of humility.
Yeah. So So, I mean, since today's topic is really about work-life harmony, and I've heard your story several times now, so I know why this is an important topic to you. Um, but just so we're all on the same page, how do you define work-life harmony?
So life work harmony for me is defined in micro moments. Okay. I think sometimes people see this topic as a destination. Like I'm going to get there, or I've gotten there. Here I am, life work harmony. And that has not been my experience or my definition of life work harmony. My definition is really around a checking in the moment. Am I feeling like there's harmony right now? And when there isn't, what do I need to do to get there again? So it's, and the micro moments are also, they're based on our expectation for life work harmony and the gap we see in that moment between what we expect and what's actually happening around us. And I think that's really important too, because it's such a personal thing. I have had discussions with people where from the outside, I think, gosh, they have no life work harmony. Or they may say the same about me, and yet it works for me or it works for them. So I think it's important for number one, for us to realize this is a very personal question and very dependent on how both you define life work harmony for yourself and where you see the gaps in the moments as you go about your day.
I think that's incredibly powerful insight. I think the fact that it's not static, as you mentioned, it is something that is dynamic and highly personal. And I think it changes over the course of your journey. I think when you're starting up a new business, you're expecting to work really long hours to get the business established. And then once you get to that point where you have established, maybe it's a little less hours depending on what your family life situation might be. And that changes. It ebbs and flows kind of throughout the journey. But I think, again, the fact that it is dynamic, ever changing, and your needs are ever changing is, again, a very, very important insight. To that end, how do you think work-life balance in particular affects entrepreneurs?
Yeah, you touched on it a little bit right now, whereas in the beginning, especially, but this could be true of, well into your entrepreneurial career, where you've got stages or moments of very high work requirements or very high life requirements. I'll speak for myself when it came to COVID and schools closing down, that I had to reassess what life work harmony looked like for me at that stage. And so entrepreneurs, as they're starting off, risk is really high, right? We're focusing on, let's make this work. There isn't the infrastructure that you typically have in corporate that can support you and help you along the way. A lot of the times we're starting solo or we're starting with a small group, and there is more work than there is people or resources to do. And so it can become a really kind of issue if you're in that and you're not taking a moment to really realize whether this is what you need right now, whether this is what is necessary in this moment, that getting the support that you need in from external places as much as possible. So I certainly see this as an issue for entrepreneurs. I see this as an issue certainly for leaders in general, people in general. And the idea is to, number one, have a definition of what life work harmony looks like for you now and how long that actually will last. And then the one piece that I think is critically important as well is to know what your end game is. So often we get into our businesses because of a passion, because of a purpose. And at the beginning, we're looking to establish ourselves, increase revenue, make this thing a go, right? And it seems like, oh, well, the end goal is to get bigger, right? And to make this a viable, sustainable business. And we need to define what that is for us. What is the life that we're looking to design, and how does work fit into that? That doesn't mean that you need to do like this ideal today. You might be going through a stage where you're required in one part of your life more than the other, but to have a sense of where you're going, of what the end game is. And I find that in our society, in North America, certainly, we're a little bit, it's always more, right? It's like this more-ness type of ailment, right? Well, of course it's to get bigger. Well, maybe it's not, right? Well, of course it's to expand. Well, maybe it's not, right? I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who define what they want in their life and their work and decide to scale back, because that's what fits in to this end game that they're looking for. So I think those two things are critically important. One, to define what it looks like for you in this moment, and to continue to ask yourself that, and then to really have a good sense of what is it that you're ultimately trying to achieve in your life, and how does work fit into that?
And understanding the steps to kind of get to where you want to be, even if you're not where you want to be right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And to allow yourself, to give yourself permission to change the end game once you've gotten to the next stage, right? We might think that our end game is one thing, and we go to the next stage, the next milestone. We're like, actually, that's not what I thought. That happened with me, right? I thought I would just continue until I became CEO of a corporation and then be bigger, and in my corporate life. And then I got to a place where I said, actually, no, more of the same is not what I want. It's something entirely different. And so having the permission to ask ourselves that question, and then the permission and the courage to pivot when required, are really important as well.
So along those lines, have you ever encountered a point where you felt like you were really out of balance from where you kind of wanted to be? And if so, how did you address that?
Yeah, all the time, every day. There are moments, definitely moments that I'm thinking, there are moments, because I truly believe that life work harmony is a micro moment phenomenon. And so there are moments in the day where I was like, oh, I got this figured out. I'm good. And then something happens. And I was like, oh, where did that harmony go? Right. And so, and I mentioned this earlier, but one of the big things that happened was schools closing. That had a huge impact on me, on life work harmony, on my assessment of what that looked like at that instance. I went from having kids in school, having help from grandparents, having a babysitter come in for date night, or, that. And I went from that to 3 kids are at home. One of them is a 5-year-old little boy, and a 9 and a 12-year-old, and they have to get work done. I have to feed all these things, right? And so in that moment, I had to reassess, what does life work harmony look for me now? Knowing the requirements that and the demands that I had, and to make peace with that, right? To accept that that's where I was, and that's what was required in that moment. Number 2 was to let go of my perfectionist. So we all have inner critics, right? We all have, And so we all have a judge. There's a professor at Stanford who's done some really wonderful research around what he calls saboteurs. And these are all of these inner critic personalities. And we all have the judge. That's one that we can all say we have. And then my second one is Ms. Perfectionist. So when this all came about, I thought, oh, okay, well, now I have to be a businesswoman and a cook and an educator and right, all of these things. And I had to let go of that. I had to realize that I couldn't do it all, and to be okay with balls falling, with not getting to everything, and not to do everything the way I really actually wanted to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And once I gave myself that self-acceptance and permission to let some things go, it became much easier for me. And that required me to really bring focus and awareness to prioritizing.
Yes.
Right? The to-do list of 50 things had to go out the window. And so what are the 2 things I need to do sometimes what's the one thing I have to do for my business today? Because the rest of the time I'm spending with my kids, right? What are the 2 things? So prioritization became a huge focus for me, and self-acceptance of just a C, even a D sometimes is okay. I wouldn't tell that to my kids, but see, I want to be an A student at everything all the time, right?
Right. And I think what's really interesting is that, you know, women in particular can be very, very hard on themselves, have this perfectionism, and that sometimes gets in the way of achieving goals. What I found was really, really interesting over the last 8 or 9 months was how forgiving others were of us, and not necessarily us being forgiving ourselves, but others were incredibly forgiving and had a lot more tolerance, which was such a pleasant change. We were allowed to make mistakes, and we were allowed to try new things and to discover and to try and pivot. And I think there was a lot more latitude to do all of those things than, you know, at other periods in time before. So that was an especially interesting dynamic. I tend to be a person who likes to do things a certain way, in a very structured way. And, you know, I just had to be flexible and adaptable and just say, okay, I'm going to let the needs of the women in the cohort, for example, drive the way that I do things. And that was something that became very, very important as well. So allowing myself to be adaptable and flexible and just to do things outside of my comfort zone. But I think in a lot of ways, it helped me to do my job even better, if I can say that.
Absolutely. There's this concept that I talk to my clients around, and it's the line. It's like everything comes down to a line, right? When you're above the line, you are getting stuff done from a place that energizes you, from a place that is purpose-driven. Because I work with a lot of perfectionists, because I guess a perfectionist attracts perfectionists. And certainly it is a saboteur that lots of women have. And they all say, but okay, but all of my accomplishments, I get stuff done, and it's because I'm a perfectionist. I said, no, the perfectionist lives here. Perfectionist is when it's draining. It's when you are exhausted, you're stressed, you've lost the bigger picture, right? Like that is the perfectionist. It's the over calibration of a benefit of, you're really good at getting stuff done, or you're really good at structuring things, or you're really good at organizing. I don't know what that is. It could be something different for different people. But the litmus test is this energizing me, or is this draining me? If it's draining me, what can I do to switch it around to have it energize me, or at a minimum be neutral, right?
Yes. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm curious about your perspective on how social media has changed the concept of work-life harmony.
Yeah, there's so many different ways of looking at that. Here's the thing about social media. Even though it's becoming less so, it's still primarily someone's highlight reel, as I've heard many people say, right? So it's the highlight of, here's a picture of me at the beach, but what you didn't see is that I've worked all morning on my laptop, but I've taken this moment to, right? And so the issue with social media, the issue with looking from the outside at someone else's life is that we're comparing how we feel on the inside with what we see on the outside. And it's an unfair comparison every single time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from a social media perspective, having the perception that it is a highlight reel, that we shouldn't be judging ourselves according to what we see. And then to also know and to look at some of the costs of social media to our own free time, to our own life work harmony. That there's been so much research that shows that we are actually getting a dopamine hit when we're going onto social media, which is the reward cycle. And that we have. And so whenever those moments where we had time to just have our brain settle, to have our mind really kind of work through all of the things that have gone, there's so much going on unconsciously or subconsciously for us. We are now, because we have our phones with us all the time, going and, scrolling. And we do it because it's giving us a dopamine hit, which makes us feel good for that time being, but it's short-lived. And it takes away from our time to digest, reflect, connect. And so I think we need to both look at, don't compare ourselves to others, but really become more aware of how much time we're actually spending. And could we get a dopamine hit doing something else?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm curious, what advice would you give to companies, for example, that are looking to create more work-life harmony for the people that work for them?
I would say that number one is you want to be really clear about expectations. You want to be clear about what's priority, right? This kind of idea of having a slew of priorities just doesn't work. It doesn't work during COVID. It doesn't work outside of COVID. And so becoming really clear about where you're going and what's the one or two top priorities, and having people aligned to that really makes sure that we are ensuring that all efforts are accumulating over and on each other, right? Versus each person doing their own thing. So that's, business 101, but critically important. And I think not necessarily something that people apply as much as they should. And during COVID, that was one of the biggest things that I worked with my clients on, which was, what are the one or two things that needs to happen right now? Because number two is connection.
Mm-hmm.
The most important thing that we can be doing now as business leaders is connecting with our leaders, connecting with our employees, connecting with our clients, connecting with our vendors. It's reaching out, because people remember when you reached out. And during this time, when we're at home, higher isolation, we know from research that connection is a great indicator of health, well-being, success, longevity. It's critically important, and it's the one thing that has been taken away from us to a certain extent during these times. So I would say prioritize really well and make sure everyone's on the same page, and then make sure you are carving out time during your day to reach out to someone and just checking in on how they're doing.
It's interesting because prioritization has come up a couple of times now, and I'm just wondering if you have any tips for entrepreneurs, you know, when they're looking to prioritize things in their own day or week, what tips would you give them?
Yeah, I would say there are, I like, oh no, anyway, it's the urgent versus, I always like a good quadrant. So the urgent versus important quadrant, right? What are some things that you need to be doing now that just need to get done? And what's the one thing that's going to set you up correctly for the long term? I think if you look at, you know, one thing in one and one thing in the other, and you get those done first thing in the morning, then you can look at what else is what else you have time for. But you want to be doing the things that need to get done today, but you absolutely, that tends to get done. What doesn't tend to get done is a thing that's important, but long-term, non-urgent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's a great tip because it helps put things kind of into perspective, because I'm sure sometimes it can feel like there's, like you said, that whole list, but without qualifying the things on that list in that way that you just talked about, it can be so overwhelming. And I think that helps to break things down and make them more manageable. And then, yeah, it has psychological effects as well, right? I'm very curious as well. Do you think there's a difference in terms of the genders being able to achieve work-life harmony?
If you look at the research, it suggests that increases in anxiety, stress, and depression have been higher with women than men during COVID. You know, from research, we also know that women are still taking on a higher percentage of either the mental load of the things at home and or the actual physical load of getting stuff done at home. So it's not surprising. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I would be, I'm less concerned about what it is in general between men and women, because I could get frustrated with the statistics when I see them. Like, goodness, you know, like we still have stuff to do here. We still need to, and yet what's really important and actionable is how we ourselves in our own lives see that play out, and to make the adjustments, have the conversations, get the support that you need in your own life, because that ultimately at the end of the day is what makes a difference for you and for your family. So you know, it's disheartening that when I look at the statistics personally, you know, it's disheartening. And yeah, it's the reality, and I can only change what's happening in my own life. So I try to focus there.
Again, we've kind of seen firsthand with our programs, for example, the effects that it's had, and you know, it's been extremely eye-opening in a lot of ways to see, again, the many hats that women have to wear, and the increased level of responsibility on everybody as a result of COVID. And again, like you were talking about in the beginning, some of the supports that you could count on before, because of physical distancing, couldn't rely on those supports anymore. I'd love to open it up, Lisa, to the audience questions. If you have a question, please put it in the chat box, and I'll kind of go in order as the questions are raised. So if you have a burning question for Lisa, please put your question in the chat box. But I'm also curious, Lisa, from your perspective, because you do research, a lot of research in terms of neuroscience and all the rest of it, are there things that you think that we as a society need to be talking about, but aren't talking sufficiently about?
Well, one thing is the impact that COVID has, like, what does that mean from a brain perspective? If we look at it from that lens, it starts to make a lot of sense, or it makes sense of how much we're seeing in terms of numbers increasing in percentage of people feeling overwhelmed, anxiety, stress. COVID-19 was unpredictable, was brand new. We had very little control of what was going to happen, and it was threatening our safety. And our brain actually works on the majority of two things. One, it's always scanning for risk, okay? And risk can be health, could be psychological risk or non-safety. We had both of those things going on, right? Actually, someone in our life might get sick, and what's going to happen to my work? What's going to happen to my company? So we were being threatened on many levels. Mm-hmm. Then our brain works on a predictive system. We had no wiring in our brain that told us how to deal with this. We didn't have past experience that could guide us, that could help us. And so our brain does not like that when it's unpredictable. And then so much was out of our control, and so you take those three things, and what ends up happening is that our prefrontal cortex, which sits right behind your forehead, starts to have foggy thinking, poor memory, poor decision-making, lack of empathy, and black and white thinking, right? And so, of course, we feel more stress and anxiety, and of course we do, right? We've just gone through collectively as a global community through something that really threatened us. And of course, we're not going to be working at our most efficient, effective levels, right? And so that's why I said, and I think it's incumbent on us business leaders to reduce our priority list, to look at what we're focusing on, because there's no way that we can continue to be as efficient during those times, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say the realization or the acknowledgement of what we've all just been through, and to have that drive self-acceptance and self-compassion. And if you've ever needed permission to take care of yourself, I'm giving it to you, both scientifically and spiritually, and as someone who is in community with you here, do it, because it's that important. It really is that important.
Thank you. Because I think sometimes, we feel like we need permission to take those moments and to practice self-care. So I thank you for doing that. We've had a number of questions come in from the other women on the call. Chantel's question is up first. She's really intrigued by the micro moments, and she's hoping that you can explain again what you mean by micro moments. What does that look like?
Yeah, the concept behind the micro moment of life and work concept comes in my belief that there is no destination where we've accomplished life-work harmony. It is in the moments that we can assess whether we feel that we are in harmony or not, right? And so in that moment, we've got an opportunity to either change our expectation of what harmony looks like in that moment, or we have an opportunity to make a change, an active change, to change what we're doing so that we are more close to the expectation that we have. But when we first started to talk years ago about, we used to call it balance, right? And everyone's like, there's no such thing, right? there's no destination. It's a moment by moment holding of the question and a noticing of whether we feel we are in harmony.
Mhm.
And when we feel something's off, we've got two places to look: expectation or what we're actually doing in that moment.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that makes sense. We have a question from Angela. She says that every opportunity can be a good one, but if you chase after every opportunity, you can be wasting your time. What advice would you give for knowing which opportunities to let go of?
I love this question. And I would say that you go internally to check. I have made decisions that made absolutely no sense. Like if you would look at it from the outside, you'd be like, Lisa has lost her marbles. What is going on, right? Like what is happening? And it's because when I sat with the decision and I checked in whether I felt expansive about it, I could still have some fear around it. When I left my corporate gig without knowing where I was going to do next, I was afraid. Like, am I going to find my way? What am I going to do? I've just spent 20 years building this career, and the road ahead is so clear. And why am I totally letting that go and doing something entirely different? There was something inside me that said, you're meant to go this way. And so, I'm not going to take away from the analytical of pros and cons and, yes, do that. And then check internally, because we've got wisdom that is intellectual, but we also have much more knowledge and wisdom within us that I don't think we value as much. We're beginning to, but we don't value as much in general. And so do the pros and cons, and then go internally and say, am I meant to do this? Is my body expansive when I think about this? Or is there something inside me that's actually closing off, that's saying, might look like a great idea, but it's not for you.
And I think going back to your earlier point, is it creating energy or taking energy away is also a part of that whole equation.
Absolutely.
Nora asks a really great question. She has little ones, like really young, 6 and under, and she finds it really challenging. She has a 13-month-old, and she finds it really challenging to take care of her during lockdown. And she doesn't have the support that she used to before the lockdown. And she's kind of asking what she can do to navigate these moments, trying to balance providing childcare when the 13-month-old is around and having to kind of do work at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, that is tough. So let me just start there. Acknowledge that it was Nora, right?
Nora, yeah.
So Nora, acknowledge that what you're going through is a tough stage. It is tough to take care of a small child and still balance everything else when the natural or some of the support that we had in the past is no longer there. So my first plea as a mom of 3 is please, please, please be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself, and allow yourself to let some stuff go, right? Just allow yourself, know that this is a stage, and allow yourself, and I'm going to say this because I think as women will fully get this. Allow yourself the grace and the love and the empathy that you would give your best girlfriend, right? Look at it from that perspective. So first and foremost. And then I would go back to when you do have the time to commit to your business, just look at the 1 or 2 things you need to do, right? and spend some time looking at where you could get support somehow on the business, whether sometimes it's contra, I'll do this for you, can you do this for me, something like that, or just finding the support somehow, like spending some actual time thinking about what can I get off my plate, what can someone else take on for me, that will help me get a little further on. But empathy comes first.
Mm-hmm. And I think she used the hashtag mom guilt. And I think, many of us can sympathize with that. But I think some of the key things that you said, having empathy with ourselves and allowing ourselves, to have the understanding that these are unique, exceptional circumstances, and to be forgiving of ourselves, as you mentioned earlier, super, super important during this time. And again, I think collectively people have been more forgiving of others. So again, we have to be forgiving of ourselves in those situations as well.
And I just want to say, and I don't want to interrupt you, Nicole, but Nora, because we don't always hear it, you're doing a great job. I know you are. I don't know you, and I know you are, because you're a mom and you are going to be caring for that child and doing all sorts of other stuff too. So just know that you are doing a great job.
Thank you for that. And I know Nora's doing a good job. So Adriana is asking, do you have any tips for overcoming procrastinating over things that we know we need to do, but we dislike doing?
There's so many different ways I could answer this. If anyone's read The Big Leap would say, Gary, I've forgotten his last name now, I think. Anyway, he would say that as leaders, part of our job is to find our zone of genius and stay there and get other people to do the things that are not our zone of genius. And that will help with flow, with non-procrastination, because we're doing all the stuff that we love to do, right? Mm-hmm. That's not always possible at the beginning of a business. And so what has worked for me in terms of things that I don't like to do is to chunk it out, right? Typically, if we say, oh, I'm going to do all the stuff I don't like to do on this day, right? No, because I don't want to go. No, I'll find the dirtiest closet in my house to clean before I go do that, right? Yeah. But if I chunk it out into small pieces and I just commit to something really small that day, one small step each day is better than no steps, right? Mm-hmm. So chunk it out, take the tiniest little step towards it, commit to only that, and just make sure that you're doing one little thing that you might not like, even if it's like 10 minutes. 10 minutes is better than no minutes, right? Start there and just chunk it out. Don't do it in one day.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that's great advice. Makes it more manageable. So Amy's asking a very interesting question as well. She has a similar profile in the sense that she left the corporate world after 20 years. She's been on her own entrepreneurial journey and doesn't want to go back to corporate life right now. But when she encounters an acquaintance that might be getting an amazing corporate job, she can't help but feel envious sometimes. Wondering if she made the wrong choice, or worse, if she might have had the capacity to take on those kinds of jobs at all. She's wondering if you ever feel like that.
Yes. Absolutely. Here's a very deep knowing. I know that I'm not meant to go back to corporate. I just, in this moment, right? If you ask me, that is not a forever, I don't know. But in this moment, I will tell you that in deep within me, I know that I'm not meant to go back to corporate. Having said that, when I see someone getting a promote, I don't know, some title or being recognized, of course I say, oh, what would have happened had I stayed, right? I was being groomed to take on more. I was top 1% of employees worldwide. I had all the stuff, whatever, who knows what would have happened. But I remind myself of how unfulfilled I truly was when I was there. And, you know, I left out a lot of, obviously a lot of pieces of my story because we only have a certain amount of time here, but I left the corporate job, had all sorts of doubts, started having recruiters call me and went on interviews. And I would have a visceral bodily reaction to going into a place with cubicles for some reason. It was just in the moment, I was like, and I would be in the interviews and I would talk to them and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I totally know, right? I know you, like, I don't want to be that. I just don't want to be there. I knew it for myself, but absolutely I feel that way. And Amy, I would also say that it wasn't an easy road right after I left. I don't know how long you've been out of the corporate world, but the first at least a year, maybe more, it was hard. It was hard because I had lost my identity. I had no idea how attached I was to the identity of corporate executive. No idea. I thought, oh, you know, my parents are first generation. I'm first generation Canadian. My parents come from very humble beginnings. I had no expectation that this is what I would become. And so I know who I am. And then I left and I felt naked and I felt raw and I had no idea what would come next. I felt lost. So it was hard. Lots of tears were shed. Thank you.
Yes.
Lots of tears were shed, and I don't regret it. I am who I am today because of that hard time. I know that. But yeah, I went on a bit. That's a passionate part of my story. So I went a little longer.
But again, to bring it back to something else that you spoke of, like what's the end game, right? And how does all of this fit into that? And reminding yourself about what is it that you want to accomplish, you know what I mean? And what would it take to get there? You know what I mean? Amy has 3 kids just like you do, and they're all young as well. So again, what would Amy be giving up if she was still in her corporate career, in terms of her family and all the rest of it, if she didn't open up her own legal practice kind of thing? So, yeah, that's great. I think we have time for one more quick question before we wrap up. So I'm just gonna, whoever puts their question in the box first is gonna get the chance to have their question answered, essentially. Okay, I'm gonna give you 10 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay. So I think we covered a lot in this fireside chat. I can't thank you enough for being here with us. And, you know, it's been a very, very thoughtful conversation, Lisa. I think you giving permission to the people on the call to be gentle and kind to themselves is really, really important. And again, the insight about the fact that work-life harmony is very, very individual. The end game and how that work-life harmony ties back into that end game is also very, very individual, very personal. But I think you've given us some great tips to think about and to consider as we wind down for the holidays and hopefully get some much needed rest and time to, again, just to be, to think, to feel, to do all of the things that we haven't been able to do over the last 8 months. So I thank you very much for joining us today. I thank everybody in the audience for being here today, and wish you all wonderful, restful, lovely holiday, and look forward to seeing everybody again soon. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.